Live. All right, well, grab your Bibles, turn Isaiah 11. Isaiah 11. So this week you're in the book of Isaiah, and so I've been reading a lot in Isaiah this week, and kind of wish we had more readings, but that's okay. I encourage you to go back over Isaiah in addition to the readings that we have. I think you'll be blessed for it. Isaiah is one of those books that I absolutely love, but too often ignore. So I always like it whenever I'm forced to read through it, or certainly sections of it. And so what you're getting this week in your readings, Isaiah 1 and 2 and 6, 11, 53, those are the real big highlights, but really the whole book is worth reading. It's not a hard book usually. If you can get down to nitty-gritty, you can get some places difficult, but I think certainly if you have a good translation, you can follow along with what the prophet is saying. So Isaiah 11, right here is a blessed passage. We've looked at it before in some detail. I want to start here with a painting, and Donna actually may need your help. It's doing that clicky thing. Well, while we get the painting up here, I'm going to show you a painting from an artist my wife did not know. And my wife is art history. The only history she likes is dudes who color and draw and all that sort of stuff. And I asked her, do you know this guy? He was a Quaker out of Pennsylvania, naturally, born in 1780. His name was Edward Hicks. He was a painter, an artist, and a preacher. And this is perhaps his most famous painting. However, don't assume he just did this painting. By that I mean is what you see here, he redid over 60 times. That's to say that he had a certain scene and he continued to reimagine it, to repaint it. And you can line up the surviving ones that we had. He gave many of them away. But you can line up the surviving ones. You can Google some of them, and I'll show you some later. But you can line them up, and you can see the similarities. You can find differences. For example, there's no angel in this one, but in others there is an angel, and I think some ones I'll show you later there'll be an angel, but they may be in different places. This bull here, his horns will be shaped in a different style, so a different kind of bull, depending on the painting and whatnot. But what he is depicting here is one big scene, but what he's doing is he's taken Isaiah 11 and he sees it in the contemporary context of the early and mid 1800s. Okay, so notice what you have here. You have the lion and the lamb, all these. So you have predators and prey. This is the Christ child. He's always portrayed as a young child, and you'll notice there he is guiding this predatory animal. I don't know who these people are. I think this is a baby supposed to play with a snake, as we'll see. But I couldn't find the snake last time I was looking at it. But I'm not an art guy, so don't rely on me on all of this stuff. But one thing that may stick out to you, say, okay, I can see Isaiah 11 here. We'll read it here in a minute. But what in the world's going on over here? You'll notice there are two types of people. There are what we might call colonialists, maybe. This would be William Penn and crew. And also Native Americans. And what they're doing is they are signing a peace treaty. Edward Hicks did an entire painting on this event. And what you have is Hicks is connecting these two events. The peace treaty with the natives and the Quakers, and the scenery from Isaiah 11. So let's look at Isaiah 11 and see if we can connect these two events. We want to read just the first few verses. I believe the first 9 verses here. There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, a branch from his root shall bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. His delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes see, or decide disputes by what his ears hear. But with the righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. He shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt of his waist, and faithfulness the belt of his loins. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the lion and the fattened calf together, and a little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze, their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the cobra, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the adder's den. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. So imagine, if you will, living on pioneer land. It'd be language we would use. And growing up a Quaker, and growing up, and he's a preacher now, and you're reading through Isaiah 11, which is the passage that continues to stick so important in his mind. When William Penn signs the treaty with the Native Americans, finally there is peace. And he lives in a land largely unbothered, right? Full of creatures. Think about it. If you lived in Pioneer, Kentucky, my ancestors on the Craig side came to Kentucky in 1781. They officially migrated. They had set up a few forts before that. In 1781, and this area right here was loaded with bison, which is why if you go over to Scott County, not too far from here, you will find Great Crossing right next to Stamping Ground. And the reason is because that was a great crossing for buffalo, where they would stomp on the ground, right? I mean, it's you read the old place names, and you know exactly what's going on there, or who owns the land, right? Great Cross or Stamping Ground was originally called McConnell's Run. It was a creek owned by a guy named McConnell, right? I bet you could probably figure that out, right? And it, of course, was eventually changed Stamping Ground Baptist Church, which is now goes by another name. So here he is in Pennsylvania. He sees animals everywhere, and he really believes that America is going to become the fulfillment of Isaiah 11. That Christianity triumphs to the point to where there is genuine peace. In fact, he would even allegorize some of this passage. It isn't just that a literal lion and a literal lamb will lie down in Pennsylvania. There are no lions that I'm aware of ever that hanging out in Pennsylvania. But rather is to say that because of the Quaker movement, the rise of Christianity, remember Pennsylvania is the first to fully practice religious liberty, that what you have then is the animalistic instincts of humanity have been tainted. They've been calmed down. And there's a sermon you can read by Edward Hicks where that is exactly his application from this passage. And so he depicts, here's William Penn, whom he looked up to, considered a godly man, who keeps and honors the treaty he signs with the Native Americans, and there is peace. His other paintings reflect this. He has a famous one of George Washington. He has some really beautiful scenery of farms and whatnot. And you can sort of see this imagery of his hope of what America will become. And that is certainly the hope of colonial America. Well, let's look at the context here just real quick. In order to understand chapter 11, a text without a context is the pretext for a proof text. In chapter 10, what we see is Isaiah is ministering in Israel. Isaiah is not written in a chronological order. It's more of a thematic approach to it. That's why chapter 6 comes before chapter 1 chronologically. So do with that whatever you want, right? Well, he ministers in Judah during the time of the Assyrian occupation of Israel. And we looked at this with the story of Hezekiah some weeks ago, right? The Assyrians come and destroy all of Israel. And you remember, and Isaiah tells this in conjunction with 2 Kings, that Assyria comes all the way to Jerusalem and conquers much of Judah. And they're ready to take over Judah when all of a sudden something happens, right? Isaiah says it was an angel does this. Strikes the Assyrians and they have to flee. So this is happening right when the Assyrians are rising, taking over one fortified city after another. And what Isaiah foretells in chapter 10 is, first of all, Assyria will be judged. Let's look at it real quick. Chapter 10, verse 5. Woe to Assyria, the rod of my anger. The staff in their hands is my fury. Same thing down in verse 12. When the Lord had finished all his work on the Mount Zion and on Jerusalem, he will punish the speech of the arrogant heart of the king of Assyria and the boastful look in his eyes. Right? And much of that is fulfilled in the ministry and reign of Hezekiah. And again, go down to verse 16. Therefore, the Lord God of hosts will send wasting sickness among the stout warriors, and under his glory a burning will be kindled like the burning of a fire. The light of Israel will become a fire, and his Holy One a flame. It will burn and devour his thorns and briars in one day. So you see the judgment upon Assyria. And Isaiah is encouraging the citizens of Judah, don't be afraid of Assyria. God will ultimately send them in the judgment. He will destroy them. Don't worry about them. However, that doesn't mean that there will not be suffering against the people of Judah by the hands of the Assyrians. There will be much of that. And as a result, what you'll find both with the destruction of the northern tribes and then, of course, the southern tribes is the population of the Jews drops dramatically. Many are killed and slaughtered and dispersed. And so what he does in chapter 10 is Isaiah promises that there will be a remnant of Israel who survives. This isn't unique among the prophets. Perhaps most famous is Elijah. You remember when he runs from Jezebel and he goes to Mount Sinai and he cries out to God, I'm the only one left that hasn't bowed to Baal. And God says, I've kept a remnant. It's only 500 people, not even a mega church today, but we've got a few hundred people, and through that will come the revival of Israel. If only I can think of a good application there. But look at chapter 10, verse 20 to 21. In that day, the remnant of Israel and the survivors of the house of Jacob will no more lean on him who struck them, but will lean on Yahweh, the Lord, the Holy One of Israel in truth. A remnant will return, the remnant of Jacob to the mighty God. And go down to verse 24. Again, this is just to highlight this. Therefore, thus says the Lord God of hosts, O my people who dwell in Zion, be not afraid of the Assyrians when they strike with the rod and lift up their staff against you as the Egyptians did. For in a very little while, my fury will come to an end, and my anger will be directed to their destruction, and there will be a remnant here for you. So we have these dual ideas, right? The Assyrians will be destroyed, Israel will be preserved, right? Because God has made an eternal covenant with the people of Israel. Now you'll notice what the focus is here on chapter 10. The focus is on political realities. God will keep his covenant with Israel in time. And it is to that hope that Israel was to look toward. Assyria will be destroyed, but this hope to them in the present tense looked impossible. I mean, think about it. How can you say the Assyrians will be destroyed whenever no one's been able to hold them back? They can't defeat them in battle. They can't push them back even a little bit. Wherever they go, they destroy. They are like wild locusts. Less likely than the destruction of Assyrians would be the return of the Jews, a remnant to be preserved, because they are looking at genocide here. They are looking at being wiped out by the Assyrians. Now, that perspective of political, cultural, international realities transitions in chapter 11. And what he presents in chapter 11 is less believable. If it's impossible to see how the Assyrians will be destroyed, if it's more impossible to see how a remnant of Israel will be preserved, how much more impossible is it to see the Messianic age described here? Came across a story actually on Albert Mohler's podcast today. Have you all seen this story about the ambassador to Germany? You all aware of this? I don't know her name, but she's recently named the ambassador of Germany, just went over there and did a few events. Her story is significant because her father escaped to America from Nazi Germany. They were Jews, I believe. Don't quote me on that. And so to escape the fury and the evil of Hitler's racism and just plain up just evil, they come to America. And he was so angry, he would not allow his family to speak German even privately in the home. They were to become Americans. They were to speak English. They were to reject their entire identity as Germans. They were now Americans. So she grew up in a home where Germany was to be hated and feared. And her father would tell her all the time that there would be peace is impossible. Well, she grows up and she goes to school and does all this sort of stuff. And her father has since died, and she took a picture of her father all the way to Germany, to his hometown. Here she is as the ambassador of the United States to Germans. And they were allies, close allies. And there is peace. She is welcomed in, I think Augsburg is where they were from. And there is a picture of her father, right? And she I mean, can you imagine what a moment that is for her? Something her father could have never have imagined. Yet here it is in her own lifetime. So too, that's similar to what it is you get here. If it looked impossible, chapter 10, what you see in chapter 11 is less likely. Well, notice right from the beginning, we have a transition, chapter 1. There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit. So we are immediately drawn, our attention is, again, away from present realities to a even farther future hope. And this is the Messianic age. Now, the imagery, that Isaiah is borrowing from is one of a felled tree. Now, this isn't unique. Isaiah will use this imagery of a tree quite a bit. For example, in Isaiah 6, though a tenth remain in it, it will be burned again like a terebinth in an oak, whose stump remains when it failed. Notice this, the holy seed, Israel, is its stump. You see here that it isn't a great and mighty fruit-producing tree. What is left is a stump. All right. Now, to you and I, a stump is essentially a dead tree. It's not going to grow, not going to do anything. My wife's been doing this thing all spring and summer. She's got some green onions, and inside the house she puts them in water. I don't know what else she's doing. Ask her, because I'm not interested in this stuff. But she will cut up the green onion, right, and put it on whatever she wants. She will put then whatever's left in the water, and like a week or two later, she's got enough of that green onion growing back, she can chop up the green onion again. I don't know how it works. Don't ask me, right? She's from Carroll County. They're weird. Well, trees don't work that way. Right, we cut down a big old tree in our backyard last year, and that stump is not going to grow. And so the imagery of a felled tree is not a positive one. Israel is but a stump. A lot of good that's going to do here. But you also need to notice that in Isaiah, he's been predicting both the triumph of David's seed and simultaneously the downfall of the Davidic line. See? David's seed will triumph. David's seed will be destroyed. Here's both are true. And again, that seems impossible. And so what he shows us here is he is both the root and the shoot. I love that. Don't you love when the Bible does all the rhyming and everything else? It'd be a lot easier on preachers, right? Whenever everything's lined up for you, it does all the work for you. Now, notice this word shoot. It means twig or branch, right? And it's translated rod in Psalm 14, if you want. I think it's the only other time that word is used. And we are expected to compare this messianic description with what he said about Assyria. In chapter 10, God described Assyrians as being cut down like a forest of trees, and with them come the Israelites. In contrast, Israel will be left as a stump, so not much is left. However, out of this stump comes a sign of life. It's a beautiful picture, isn't it? For the two of you who like Lord of the Rings, I think you'll pick up on this imagery of the white tree of Gondor. When Pippin comes up with Gandalf, right, to meet the governor, and he sees that the white tree the leaves are coming off, it's beginning to show signs of death. But by the end of the story, the white tree of Gondor is starting to bear fruit. Something similar here. You're left with a stump, but all of a sudden you're seeing a shoot come out, a twig, a branch, something very small, seemingly insignificant, but it shows that there is life to be seen. And this is Israel. It is God's grace in the midst of what seems like an impossible option for them. So what the world saw was an unstoppable force in Assyria, but through judgment, God would restore broken Israel, like a shoot from a stump. So not only is you see a shoot, you also see a root. So the Messiah is the shoot of Israel, right? He is also the root of Israel. I think that's pretty straightforward, right? He is what gives it life. He is the foundation by which it stands. And notice that it is of Jesse. So there shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from this is from Jesse's roots, right? And it will bear fruit. Now, we know this is a reference to David, but why not say David? Because almost every time Jesse is referenced outside of chapter 16 of 1 Samuel, it's in reference to David. David is Jesse's son. Here it just says it's the son of Jesse here. Well, the prophets would often say that the Messiah will be the descendant of David, and that is true. However, remember what Isaiah is doing. He is presenting the triumph of David's seed and the downfall of his line. So I think what he's doing here is he's taking us not to David, but to Jesse, saying that there will be the triumph of David's seed will come through a new David. So don't look at David, look at Jesse, for we need a true and better David here. This, of course, I think is the Messiah, Jesus. And he's described as the branch. This, again, is common imagery of the Messiah. We've looked at this before. For example, Jeremiah 23, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up David a righteous branch, and he will reign as king. Likewise, chapter 33 of Jeremiah, in those days and at that time, I will cause a righteous branch to spring up for David. He'll execute judgment. Zechariah 3 is my favorite. This is one of my favorite chapters in the Old Testament. Hear now, O Joshua the high priest, you and your friends who sit before you, they are men who are a sign. Behold, I will bring my servant, the branch. We'll look at Isaiah 53 later this week, where it's the servant song. We'll look at it Sunday night too. Finally, Zechariah 6, hear now, O Joshua the high priest, you and your friends who sit before you, they are men who are a sign. Behold, I bring my servant the branch. It reads exactly the same, which is interesting. So what we see here then is the Messiah, the coming of the Messianic age. But you'll notice in verse 2, the Messiah will be spirit-filled and wise. The Spirit of the Lord will rest upon him, the spirit of wisdom and understanding, spirit of counsel and might, spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. It's interesting that compared to the other prophets, Isaiah mentions the Holy Spirit more than the others. I think that's interesting. I think Luke does it more than the other four Gospels. Do with that whatever you want. Unfortunately, the Davidic kings have so often lacked the Spirit of the Lord. That's the whole reason they're in this mess. So you'll notice that this Messianic king, the way it's depicted, first of all, he will have wisdom and understanding. That's a common language in Proverbs. I think we've seen that in recent weeks. He'll have counsel and might. This is military terms. It implies strategy and the ability to execute a plan. So like a general would have his counsel, right? This is how we're going to beat the enemy. And then the strength or the might will be the execution of that. So a general who is strong is one who has the ability to execute the plan and is one who's able to carry it out himself, right? He's strong, he's mighty. So let me show you this. I'm not making it up. Counsel, here's an example of counsel. 2 Samuel, Absalom said to Ahithophel, we're going to have to get used to saying that soon when we get to 2 Samuel. Give your counsel, what shall we do? Notice that they're preparing for war. We need to come up with a game plan here. Likewise, in chapter 17, Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the counsel of Hushai, the Archite, is better than the counsel of Ahithophel, for the Lord had ordained to defeat the good counsel, and so on and so forth. But you notice, the counsel of one, his plan, is better than the other. It's all in the context of warfare. Strength or might, it could even be translated bravery or even valor. So in Isaiah 3, your men shall fall by the sword, and your brave men, your strong men, your mighty men in battle. These are soldiers, right? 1 Kings 16, now the rest of the acts of Omri that he did and the might that he showed. How do kings show might? They do it in warfare. By the way, this, if you're looking for other examples of might, it's all over 1 Kings. Every time like a king, they're done telling the story, King Jehoshaphat and all his might, King so-and-so, all his might, right? So this is one of about a dozen examples I could give you. So notice, again, he is wise and understanding. He has counsel and might. And finally, he has knowledge and the fear of the Lord. This is the root of godliness and wisdom. We see this throughout Proverbs, these two words together. Like for example, 1:7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. All right? They hated knowledge, did not choose the fear of the Lord, right? So if you have knowledge, you fear the Lord. If you fear the Lord, you have knowledge. If you don't have knowledge, you don't have fear. If you don't have fear, you don't have knowledge. Here's two more. You will understand the fear of the Lord and find knowledge. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The knowledge of the Holy One is insight, right? We've seen these in our study of. But what matters here is what gives the Messiah these characteristics. It's the Spirit of the Lord. And that's true for us today, right? That if you're wanting wisdom and knowledge and discernment and strength and counsel and might, it comes exclusively from the Spirit of the Lord. And that's what the Messiah will have. Well, he'll have wisdom, verse 2, but he will also rule in justice, verses 3 to 5. So in verse 2, he will fear the Lord. Notice what he'll do in verse 3. He will delight in the Lord. Here's the thing, that the modern reader thinks it's one or the other. Either you fear the monsters under your bed at night, or you delight in the monsters under your bed at night, right? These two words don't go together. Right? But theologically, it makes a lot of sense. That which you fear, if it's God, you will delight in him. And those who delight in the Lord do so because they fear the Lord. And so he has both, and we are to have them as well. But what you have here is that in him, the innocent find justice, the wicked find judgment. For example, go down to verse 5. Righteousness shall be the belt of his waist. Now, remember what a belt is at this time. Nowadays, belts play an important role, but they are largely decorative. I can prove this to you. If you are a little boy and you are wearing a pair of pants, they fit fine even without the aid of a belt. And you walk into the living room where you find your mother, what is she going to say? Where's your belt? You will respond with, well, Mom, I don't need a belt. My pants fit fine. Here, I'll show you, right? You do the jiggly thing she does at JCPenney, you know what I'm talking about, right? You say, see, I don't need a belt, they fit fine. She'll say, I don't care, go back and put a belt on. Now, what function does the belt have in that scenario? It's decorative, right? So belts today, they play a practical function, obviously, also decorative, right? Well, at this time, a belt held everything together. The belt was very, very important. Everything a person wore was held together by the belt. Thus, here we see the Messiah. Righteousness is the belt of his rule. He rules in righteousness. He judges in righteousness. He loves in righteousness. That's the thing when it comes to the judgment of God. We don't like to hear of God's judgment because man's judgment is often biased and not adequate. But God rules, reigns, and judges and loves in righteousness. And that's the whole point. Well, so he'll rule in justice, verses 6 to 9. His kingdom will be shalom. Now, we humans, we long for peace, and that longing is very deep-seated. And it's one of the deepest desires we have. And this is why we do a lot of things that we do. We buy insurance for everything. Car insurance, house insurance, health insurance, rental insurance, so on and so forth. So not only will we have insurance to give us peace, we'll have retirement plans and investments, and we'll plan for the future. We'll have savings. We'll investigate schools when we move to a new community, right? We'll protect our children, bubble wrap them and whatnot. Build large armies and sign treaties and make contracts, hire diplomats, elect officials, eat better, exercise, go on vacation, consume endless entertainment, surf the internet, right? What it is we're looking for in these is some sense of peace. Now, maybe a small sense of peace, right? So you may get life insurance, right? So that if something were to happen to you, your children will be taken care of, right? There's a sense of peace that is in that. The problem is that we can't find ultimate peace. An unshakable peace not determined and shaped by our circumstances. We will also define peace often as the absence of conflict and the absence of suffering. But when you think about it, it's a very limited definition of peace. This is why politically we define peace as the absence of conflict, right? Now, peace comes when the enemy stops fighting, right? They surrender. And an absolute surrender is the best. So I'll give you a good example of this in the 20th century. Compare our relationship with Japan and our relationship with North Korea. We fought both within about a 20-year period. Okay? What's the difference? Why do we still have soldiers on the border between South and North Korea? And why don't we? Now, we still have soldiers in Japan, of course. We have soldiers everywhere, but not for the same reason. Why is that? Because Japan was brought to absolute unconditioned surrender. I think it was Douglas MacArthur who walked in there and said, this is the way it's going to be, right? We didn't do that with Korea. Now, whether or not we should have, I don't know. I'm not an expert in these things. But what you have is not absolute surrender. Korea, what you end up with essentially two countries, right? One we ally with, the other we just, you don't know what's going to happen out there, right? But if you want peace, absolute peace, it'll come with absolute surrender. So this is why Reagan's famous policy, you remember, especially whenever he did so-called Star Wars in the 1980s. You remember what his slogan was? It was peace through strength. If you don't want your enemies to attack you, make them scared of you. So the only way for you to have peace is for them not to have peace. Heard someone talk about the Russia-Ukraine thing. I'm not interested in getting into that. But they made a good point. He said, Americans sometimes forget that to the Ukrainians, the Russians are next door. To the Russians, the Ukrainians are next door, whatever country you want it to be. The Taiwanians with Chinese. What do we have next door? Canada. I'm not too worried about that. And Mexico. Not too worried about them. This is because we're so strong, but we get along pretty well, for what I can tell, right? But when it's next door, if you want peace, they can't have peace. That's sort of the way we approach it today. There's a great scene again in Lord of the Rings. After Saruman, the wizard, is defeated, he says to King Theoden of Rohan, you have fought many wars and slain many men, Theoden king, and made peace afterwards. Can we not take counsel as we once did, my old friend? Can we not have peace? And what does Theoden say? We shall have peace, the way Tolkien writes it, right? He just gives that, we're going to have peace. And the reader thinks, how can you say that when Saruman just tried to wipe you completely out? Then he adds, we shall have peace when you answer for the burning of the Westfold and the children that lie dead there. We shall have peace when the lives of the soldiers whose bodies were hewn even as they died against the gates of Hornburg are avenged. When you hang from a gibbet for the sport of your own crows, we shall have peace. Now, is that peace? No. It might be justice. I'll let you decide if you're on the King Theoden's side or Saruman's side. But what you have here is bigger than that. What you have is shalom. Shalom. For the Bible, peace is less about the absence of conflict and suffering and more about the presence of wholeness. You see the difference? We speak of peace as the absence of something bad. The Bible speaks of peace as the presence of something whole. It's a huge difference for us to see. So the word the Bible gives to this is shalom. It means complete, it means whole. We often translate it as peace, and that's a perfectly fine one. The word describes anything without cracks or holes in it. So if you were building a wall, right, or let's say a roof, okay? This would be very practical for us. We're going to put a new roof on, and after the first rain, it starts to leak. We would say, in Hebrew tongue, the roof is not shalom. It's not complete. It's not whole. It's got a crack in it. Okay? But if we build that roof and the rains just come, just pour down, and there's no leak, we would say it's because of the roof is shalom. Okay? So it's complete. Now, when you apply that, the peace is a very good English word for that. Now, this has been depicted so far in Isaiah. Let me show you quickly. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, the government will be upon his shoulders. His name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor. Now, where have I seen Counselor and Mighty today? Probably Isaiah 11. Counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father, Prince of Shalom. Of course, this is Christmas, right? So not time to read that. But you'll notice how Isaiah presents shalom in this chapter. First of all, shalom is reconciliation, verse 6. The wolf will dwell with the lamb, the leopard lie down with the young goat, the calf and the lion, the fattened calf together, a little child will lead them. So you have predators on the one hand, wolves, leopards, lions, and they are with defenseless, the defenseless prey, sheep, goats, calves, and children. Now notice here, they will dwell together, they will lie down together. Now notice here, what we want is for them to leave each other alone, right? That's not the imagery here. They go to their camp, and the Messiah is going to be in the middle, keep them away from each other. That's what you do with like little brothers. Anyone else go to church and your parents sat between the kids? The max there is 3. I noticed because I grew up, there's 3 of us. It'd be like me, dad, my brother, mom, sister. That's why we sat, And when mom and dad had to be in choir all during church, it was the 3 of us in mom's eyes, just staring at us from the back in the front of the church, right? Yeah. So that's not what you have here. It's not that they are separate from each other. That's the absence of conflict. What you have is reconciliation. The lion and the lamb are lying down together. They are dwelling together. And a child will guide them. You would never let a child go over and pet Mufasa in the wild, right? You wouldn't do that. Okay? So this is reconciliation. But it isn't just reconciliation. Verse 7 describes harmony. The cow and the bear shall graze. Their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. Notice, Isaiah is contrasting predators. Here's bears and lions, oh my, with the defenseless animals, cows and oxen. And this time, they don't just lie down together, though that's there. They graze and they eat straw together. It's harmony. So the source of conflict in that one is a meat eater has now been removed. This is a restoration of the garden, right? Where they are in harmony. They graze together. They eat the grass together. So they're no longer at war, nor do they fear each other. Thirdly, the depiction is one of safety, reconciliation, harmony, and safety. Verse 8, the nursing child shall play over the hole of the cobra, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the adder's den. This imagery, just the dad in me, I can't stand verse 8. Can you? You just like, I'm sure you moms are like, not in my house, right? My predecessor, where I served at before, he put a picture on Facebook. His daughter saw a black snake, and didn't want it to get run over, so picked up the black snake and took it over to the side of the road, right? And he took a picture of it, Like, a lot of you moms wouldn't like that, right? Just like gardener's snake? No, I don't care. But certainly modern parents would freak out at this scene. Now, the word here is very clear that this is a poisonous snake. Mine says cobra. Is that what y'all have? You want to have maybe an adder or viper, maybe? Okay, so the parallelism, it borrows both. Good. It's clearly a venomous snake. When the word for that I have cobra here is used, it is always to reference its venom. That's what it wants you to see. It's a venomous snake. Deuteronomy 30, I'll just give you a few examples of this. Their wine is the poison of cobras, right? Poisonous snakes. Job 20, yet his food is turned in his stomach. It is the venom of cobras within him, right? Some of us have probably had that sort of food poisoning before. He will suck the poison of cobras, right? Again, the emphasis is on the venom. I think I got one more, or 2 more. Psalm 58, they have venom like the venom of a serpent. What's important there? The venom, right? It's again, repetition is important. You will tread on the lion and the adder, the young lion, the serpent, you will trample underfoot. Now that last one is important because I think what you have here is bigger than safety. A little child can pick up the spitting cobra and not be afraid, right? But that image of mastery over the serpent runs from Genesis 3 all the way through Revelation 21. And Psalm 91 is a great reference to this. You will tread on the lion and the adder. Notice the mastery over the poisonous snake. And the young lion and the serpent you will trample underfoot. Isn't that Genesis 3:15? He will bruise your heel, you will crush his skull. We get a similar image here, right? You don't need to fear the serpent anymore because this is the age of the Messiah. You're safe from him. He has no authority or power over you. One last thing in terms of what Isaiah means by shalom in the Messianic age. That's wisdom. Verse 9. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain. For the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Now, we've already seen there, when you see the knowledge of the Lord, that is wisdom. So, I think we can see here that all these depictions draw us back to the garden, where all of these images were seen. In fact, I can prove it to you from the text. It's in verse 9, the holy mountain of God. You remember that Jerusalem was a picture of Eden. We think of Eden only as a garden, but the garden is inside of Eden, much like the temple is inside Jerusalem. So it's shaped after the garden. So when Isaiah looks forward to a future mountain of God, he has in this context Eden at its peak and Jerusalem at its best. But he's looking for a true and greater garden, Garden of Eden. So the hope so the hope forward is the longing to return. I mean, isn't that what Israel went through with the Exodus? Their hope forward was to return home. That's what Isaiah presents here. Here comes Assyria, and they're panicking. And he says, look, it seems impossible. God's going to take care of you. He'll have a remnant for you. But you need to know that's not where our hope lies. It's not in this political battle. It's not in this military fight. It's not in this war. It's not in this cultural debate. Our ultimate hope is in something far greater than this. Because after Assyria will come the Babylonians. And after the Babylonians will come the Medo-Persians. And after the Medo-Persians will come the Greeks. After the Greeks will come the Romans. After the Romans will come the barbarians. After the barbarians will come the Catholics. And after the Catholics will come a whole bunch of people. And now what do we have? I grew up, we were afraid of the communists. Then came the terrorists. And now we're afraid of each other, you know? I mean, there's always going to be a war to fight. There's always going to be someone to be afraid of. And so the temptation is for us to think, we will have peace when this battle is over with. We'll have peace when the Supreme Court makes this decision, or when this guy is elected, or when our side wins. And there may be some truth to some of that. But Isaiah says, no, if it's shalom you're looking for, it'll come in the Messiah. I mentioned Edward Hicks earlier. And that he took Isaiah 11, these first 9 verses, and he kept painting it. And it was different every time. He would finish one, give it to someone, and he was a terrible salesman, and then he would start another one, and he would just go right back to Isaiah 11. And he thought he was going to see it fulfilled. After all, he just witnessed William Penn make a peace treaty with the Native Americans. That was a rough time when they weren't getting along. Study Pioneer, Kentucky, how bad it was. Really bad. On both sides. I mean, you talk about gun rights, like in church, right? You had to have guns in church. And many men would, I've told you before, they would sit outside and just protect people inside. Anyways, well, Edward Hicks, as his hopeful promise of America was very short-lived. William Penn honored that treaty with the Native Americans, but his successors did not. So he witnessed really the opposite of what he thought America would become. He saw war and blood and violence and heresy. And many art historians and scholars of Hicks' work, they think they can see this in his paintings. Let me show you this first one again. I should have put it here at the end. All right, here it is. I want you to notice the colors. It's pretty bright. I was showing Amanda these, and she really noticed this. Much brighter, right? And that's usually a sign of good things, much like Picasso's blue period was very dark. Before that was very bright. But if we go all the way down here, here is another version of this. Right, they're called Peaceable Kingdoms, this Peaceable Kingdom paintings. And a couple things you'll see here is it's still got some of the same things, right? You've got the Native Americans and the colonialists. You've got the lion and the lamb over here. But I want you to notice, first of all, the child. And if we could put the two together, before the child was simply guiding the predators, right? What is he doing now? He's almost got it in a headlock. He's restraining the predator. Let me see if I have another one up here. This was a little darker than the more popular one. There's a lot of things to point out here. You still have the Native Americans and colonialists over here. It's interesting. He's got the water and the rise of the ships. But wait, I think, there's your angel. The angel will show up down here and all over the place. I don't know what the angel represents. But you'll notice that the animals are now more separated than they were in that first one. So you've got the sheep over here, and it's just the sheep. Now, they're together here, but here's the lion over here. But here's the Christ child. And again, his arm is over the predator. He's not guiding them in harmony. He's restraining them for a forced peace. He confessed later in life. I think that's the last one I have, yeah. He confessed later in life that the constant bickering between Christians was a real low for him. It drained him. Remember, he's a minister. For one, his fellow Quakers couldn't stand he was a painter. Painters is what rich people do. He needs to do honest work like farming, humble work like being a blacksmith, something like that. That was a Quaker. So he had a lot of bickering between Christians. And the hope he once had for humanity had been diminished. However, his hope was still not in what America could become, but he says in his sermons of who Christ is. In fact, he says, for a long time I made a mistake in this peaceable kingdom, thinking that we were naturally going to become this. And so my hope was in this land. Then I discovered my hope should be in Christ. My hope is in Christ. And so the more Christians bickered, and the more violence he saw in his home and everywhere else, it made him all the more cling to Christ. Aren't you glad we don't live in a similar world as Edward Hicks? The average Christian, from what I can tell online and in person, is we're trying to fix America. We're trying to fix our neighbor. We're trying to pass certain legislation and economic policy and military strength. And some of that stuff can be perfectly fine. But our hope becomes in those things. No wonder we're at war with each other. But if we were to cling to Christ and move forward by going back home, I think what we would find is shalom, regardless of what the Supreme Court decides, who wins in November, or what that weird cousin of yours put online. Isn't that a better vision than the one we often buy into that's given to us through the news? I think so. All right. I've worn you out enough today. Let's pray.